Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for joining us today for our first artist talk. We hope that this will be the first in a series of these chats. A couple things to go over. If this is your first Hasselblad webinar or the first time using our GoToWebinar interface, I want to run through a couple basics. Main point of today is to look at Jeff's images, so we want to make sure that you can see. So the best option for you is to use a desktop computer or a tablet. If you can join us that way, that would be best. But if you can't, a phone or any device will work. If you do get disconnected for some reason, just go back and use the email link that you received to confirm your registration, and it'll get you right back in. Also, if you can't hear us, no, I'm still talking. Check your audio settings, including the output device on your control panel. Make sure that if you're using external speakers, they are turned on. By default, we've got you muted, so don't worry if you've got a dog barking or a baby crying or even heavy machinery in the background. We got you covered. We'll have, part of this is going to be questions and answers. We want your input. We want to know what you guys want to know. So we'll do our best to answer that. So go ahead and type your questions into the question box, and we will try and address some of them during the webinar. If we don't get to all of them, we'll try and get them. We'll get all of them answered. We may do it post-webinar, but we will get all your questions answered. Today's agenda. Let me introduce the fellows to my left and to my right. To my left, I believe, is Jeff Curto, the artist we're talking about today. And to my right is John Scott with Roberts Camera. So, hey guys.
Hey there.
How are y'all?
Doing fine.
Very cool.
Happily sequestered.
So we've got 3 states covered here. We've got John in Indiana, myself in Illinois, and Jeff, you are in Wisconsin.
In Wisconsin.
So we're representing the Midwest pretty well. So a little bit about today's agenda. We're going to have Robert's overview, and we'll have Jeff tell a little bit about Jeff. I am going to talk a little bit about Hasselblad, and I'm Steve Goldsmith. I forgot to introduce myself with Hasselblad. We're going to look at Jeff's gear bag and what he has in there and what he shoots with and why he shoots with those products. And then we're going to look at the images that Jeff's provided with for us, and that's the real reason we're here, is to look at Jeff's images and see what he has created using various tools. And then we'll have a time for open conversation afterwards, discussion. We'll talk about Jeff's images, we can talk about gear, we can talk about Robert's camera, we can talk about just about anything you want. So right now I'm going to turn it over to John to talk a little bit about Robert's camera. So you're on, John.
Hello, good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us. Wanted to kind of start off just giving you a brief history. If you're unfamiliar with Robert's camera, we are Roberts Distributors LP. We're based in Indianapolis. We're a brick and mortar family business in a 3rd generation of ownership. On the slide there, you'll see Robert, which is where the name came from, Bob Paulman and Rose Paulman, who opened the store in August of 1957 in beautiful downtown Indianapolis. We really just started out being a catalog showroom, kind of, if you remember an old service merchandise, it was a good kind of metaphor. It's, you know, kitchen mixers and radios and, you know, whatever you needed in your home. We started about a decade later, where we had an employee who decided that maybe they could sell some cameras. And so they took out some ads in a catalog, and that was the beginning of photography for Robert's Camera, which has certainly been our mainstay and our primary vocation since 1968. As a little telling of our history, we've moved our downtown location in Indianapolis 3 times since we opened. We were in our previous location for about 40 years, and we moved in 2014, fall of 2014, to our current location, which is pictured there on the top image. And we also have another brick and mortar location in Carmel, Indiana, which is just due north of Indianapolis in a suburb. Meredith and her husband, Corey, are the third generation. Meredith is Bruce Paulman's eldest daughter, and Bruce ran the company for almost 50 years, and now Meredith and Corey are really taking the reins and going along strong. So we're still growing, we're still doing our thing. Customer service, we're a family business, we're a small town, but we grew our wings. Kind of the big story where Roberts really grew outside of Indianapolis is when the Pan Am Games came to Indianapolis in the 80s, and a Sports Illustrated photographer walked in the front door, and we simply just took care of him. He needed something fast. Our good friends at Nikon was the photographer's camera gear, and professional service sent them into us, and we were a fledgling dealer at the time. But we took care of them, and that's kind of been our motif ever since. If you need something, we're here to help, and we're going to make sure that you have all the service to support the sales. So, obviously, if you have any questions for us, we're certainly happy to help. I'm a member of the professional sales department with Roberts, so we handle specialty equipment. Medium format business is a little different than the normal everyday people that walk in the front door. So we're here to answer questions you have specifically about Hasselblad equipment. We handle government and educational business, and we are, we're fun. We like talking to people. We like getting to know our customers. So again, anything we can do for you, we're always here and happy to help.
Yeah, the guys at Roberts are great. Along with John in his department, we've got Jody and Nick as well, who are two great guys as well. So a great place for you to explore Hasselblad gear is through Roberts. Hey, Jeff, you're up now.
All right. Well, thanks to Hasselblad and Roberts for inviting me to do this today. I'm really excited about it. I'm watching in the little question things, a number of people who are saying hello. So some of my friends and former students and so forth. So thanks for doing that. And thanks for having me here. I'm just going to quickly reiterate that one of the things that I've discovered about photography is that those industry contacts like Steve and John are extremely important. And so if I need a piece of equipment, I just call up or email John and say, hey, I got this problem to solve. How can you help me solve it? And he'll help me solve it. So those kinds of relationships are important. I'm just going to let you read this stuff on the screen. This is a little bit about my background. I started photographing. Actually, Steve, if you could go back really quick. Thank you. I started photographing when I was 8. My dad had some darkroom equipment, and he set up a little fledgling darkroom in a basement. And I did the high school yearbook and newspaper photographer thing. And then I went on to Illinois Wesleyan, where I ended up with a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree, and followed that with a Master of Fine Arts degree from tiny but mighty Bennington College in Vermont. And then also had a pretty pivotal experience in 1983 attending one of the last Ansel Adams workshops. And that has been a huge important piece for me in a long string of things that have happened in my life. I taught full-time at College of DuPage for most of that 30-year time period, 84 to 14, 2014. Part of that was part-time, but most of it was full-time. And partly because of that Ansel Adams workshop that I did in 1983, I started doing my own photo workshops in Italy, a place that I'd been traveling to and photographing a lot. So I started those in 2009, and they're still going strong. And then from 2014 to the present, I've been teaching for the University of Georgia in their Studies Abroad program in Cortona, Tuscany. And if anybody has any interest in having a college-age student attend an arts-oriented program, this is an extraordinary program. It takes place in a small hilltop town in Tuscany. And
we're sorry that you have to go over there and do that, Jeff.
I know it's battle pay, but it's tough. So, and then some affiliations that I've had there that are worth noting. And one of the big ones was being on the board of directors and then being the chair of the board of directors for SPE, the Society for Photographic Education. So now you can go on, Steve. Thanks.
There you go, Jeff.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no
And
problem.
you know, I mentioned these photo workshops, and I get a lot of questions about them, so we thought we'd include a quick slide about them. These photo workshops that I do in Italy, and I know that there are a number of people. I see, you know, Delta Green is there in the little question thing, saying hello, and I know that she's been on a workshop with me. So thanks for showing up. And these are small group experiences. We never take more than 7 people. We go to sort of small, off the beaten track kinds of places because of the small groups. We have lots of one-on-one time. We have lots of critiques, some formal instruction that takes place, lots of field instruction, and we emphasize storytelling in the creative process. And there might be really great food and really great wine involved too. I don't want to spend a lot of time with that, but I knew that question would come up, so I'm tossing that out there. So we can move on
Jeff,
to the next slide.
thanks for sharing that, and I'm certain that it's quite an experience, and I'm sure that the food and wine plays a large part in your excursion.
You got to eat.
You got to
Yeah,
eat. You got to eat.
So yeah. So while you're out photographing and doing all these things, you need to have some gear with you. So we've listed here what Jeff has in his gear bag currently. So Jeff, X1D2, that's your primary go-to right now?
It is now. You know, it's interesting. I came to what I would think of as serious photography through the large format 4x5 camera. And it's the camera that I used for many years to both make art and money. Slowly but surely that got replaced by the digital world and the medium format camera that, you know, I had a Hasselblad 501 that I then got various digital backs for, including a Hasselblad back, and we'll even see some examples of photographs made with that gear. But at the moment, man, my go-to camera is the X1D Mark II, the newer model of the X1D, and I have just augmented my lens makeup with the newest one is the first one, the 21 millimeter. I started with the 90 and the 45. The 90 is, as we'll see, kind of my main lens. I don't have the new, I don't think anybody has the new zoom from Hasselblad yet, but I don't even know that I really need it because I came from the 4x5 world. Using prime lenses makes all the sense in the world to me, and it really kind of fits with the way I do things. And you know, the thing about this thing, I just got it off the tripod because I'm shooting some still life stuff back in my studio here, but you know, it's not big. It's not big.
Everybody got one?
It's not big. Well, we all got one. Good. It's not big and it's not heavy. And you know, when I pick up some people's you know, DSLRs, they're a mighty bit weightier than this. So I can take a few of those lenses on that list and the camera and not be much more weighted down. In fact, I don't think any more at all weighted down than somebody with a traditional DSLR. I have
just to comment, Jeff, that 3575 zoom is shipping. It's in short supply, but we are shipping them, and it's a great lens for those that have had their hands on it. It's incredibly sharp.
I get one of those because of doing this today. It's like a little...
I'm sorry, your audio is breaking up. I didn't hear you. I'm so sorry, Jeff.
All right. So I sort of skipped over the DSLR part of the digital revolution. I didn't really ever have one, and I sort of went straight to the micro four thirds digital cameras, and now the medium format cameras. So I still have the Panasonic GX8, and my main lens with that is this fantastic, it's really a great lens, Olympus 12 to 40 millimeter. And then when I want to be really small and lightweight, the Panasonic 17 millimeter, which also has a 1.7 aperture, which is awesome. So you can carry around this fairly small camera and be pretty surreptitious. I have been doing more and more with electronic flash, so it's often that I will have at least one of those two flashes, if not both, in a camera bag, the Profoto B10 and the Profoto A1. And then the Profoto Air Remote N, the Nikon one, works with the Hasselblad, so you can get TTL metering right through the Hasselblad X1D with Profoto's Air Remote N. And then I have a bunch of tripods. Like everybody's got a bunch of tripods, but the one that I travel with is the Gitzo Traveler with a ball head. And then Steve suggested that I put this in here. I also never have a camera bag without, I don't know how this will, does this read backwards to everybody?
No, it's perfect.
Photometer? Okay, see, for me, it reads backwards. I don't really know why on my little
Well,
screen.
that's just you.
So that's just me. So the Curtometer is a thing that any one of my workshoppers.
Not the Curtometer.
No, it's not the Curtometer. The
You corrected me
Curtometer.
the other day.
And
Yeah.
I think Marty Grassi said he was going to come to the event. He might be out there. He's the guy who coined this term, the Curtometer. So this is a variation in like the 5th generation now of a tool that I was first given in that Ansel Adams workshop. And all it was in that instance was a black piece of cardboard with a hole cut in the middle that was about the same size as a 4x5 piece of film. I kept using it, and I kept using it and kept using it. And now I've got this sort of spiffy plastic coated one with QR code. The QR code takes you to curtometer.com. So you can go there and see what it's all about. It's even got a little white balance square in there, right? So, but the whole idea of this is that you don't have to raise the camera to your eye to make a mental photograph. And that this allows you to do, and I'll sort of turn profile so you can kind of see this, wide angle when it's held close to your head, telephoto when it's held farther away, vertical or horizontal. You're actually making choices, compositional choices, subject matter choices, camera placement choices, without having the sort of burden of lifting the camera to your eye, because the camera to your eye suggests that two things are happening. One is you've cut off all your field of view to only what's in the viewfinder. And then the other thing that happens is that you kind of feel compelled to take a photograph. So especially when you're using a tripod, this thing can be super duper helpful, because
you've got that built-in zoom.
You're going to pick where you're going to be. And also, those of you who've listened to my podcasts or been on my workshops or in my classes, my whole Zoom with your feet thing, that's what this is all about. It's about moving yourself around, finding where you want to be in the scene, and then framing up a piece of that subject matter, and then going to the camera. But for framing your subject before lifting the camera to your eye, this thing is incredibly helpful. And I don't know how many camera bags do all of us have. I have no idea how many camera bags I have, but in every one of these camera bags, there is at least one or two Curtometers, because I always hate to be without one. So I use it. I give it to my students in my classes, whether they're workshop classes or University of Georgia classes. So there you go.
Cool.
That's what the Curtometer is.
Thanks for sharing that. And I was going to give you a brief little history update on Hasselblad, since not everyone that's on this webinar may be familiar with Hasselblad. They may be familiar with Roberts, or they may be familiar with Jeff, but maybe not Hasselblad. So we've got a long heritage. Hasselblad's first camera was produced in 1941 when Victor Hasselblad produced the HK7 for the Swedish military as an aerial camera. But more importantly, in 1957, the 500C was the camera that most of you know. It's the most iconic camera that people think of when you talk about Hasselblad. And then we made a foray in the 90s into the X-Pan, which is an incredible film-based camera that uses 35mm film and stretches it across 3 frames to give you a panoramic camera. The biggest jump in technology was in 2001 when we came out with the H1 platform. We're now on the 7th generation of H. We're on the H6D. And then we broke ground in 2016 with the world's first mirrorless medium format camera, the X1D. We were the first one in the market with a mirrorless camera, a medium format camera designed to take on or allay the challenges of a medium format camera, both in size and performance and weight and price. And now in 2019, we introduced the generation 2 of that camera, the X1D2. So same basic body design, improved screen, larger screen, a higher resolution viewfinder. We've got a series of lenses. We've now got, I think, 10 lenses ranging from 21mm all the way up to 230mm with our 1.7 converter on the 135, and then as Jeff mentioned, we have the 35 to 75 zoom lens as well. You can also use H lenses with the camera and V lenses with the camera, and there's a great bunch of people using third-party lenses from other manufacturers with the use of the electronic shutter in the camera. So a really versatile camera. The 2nd generation camera keeps all the aesthetics and form and function of the original camera. So a couple things that are important to us are image quality, the mechanics that go into designing and building the camera, and then the operations. So we've got a sensor that's about 1.8 times the size of a DSLR. All of our lenses use a leaf shutter or central shutter, so we can sync flash at any speed. And the interface on the camera is just the most simplest to use interface. If you can use a smartphone, you can use our camera. The camera was designed to allow you to make it an extension of yourself and not be bogged down with learning menus and learning how to use the camera. We want you just to get out there and use the camera. And along those lines, we've just recently introduced a mobile tethering solution for the X1D2. It's allowing you to tether wirelessly or with a wire to an iPad Pro in the field. So you've got full editing capabilities on the road and in the field with you. So X1D2, 50C, and the new 907 XSE support the iPad Pro tethering and field work. Just a great solution for on the go, a great solution for you to take to Italy with Jeff. So with that, we want to get into some of Jeff's images because that's what you came here to see. You didn't come here to see these 3 talking heads. So Jeff, we're going to get into the first image. I'll bring it up, and if you want to discuss a little bit about it and people have any questions about it, we'll try and get those answered as well. So let's take a look at this first image, Jeff.
So we've selected some pictures from really 3 different locations. Cuba, where I went with a group of other photographers, partially sponsored by Hasselblad about 1.5 years ago, and then Michigan's Upper Peninsula, where I spend a lot of time photographing and living, and then also Italy. So there are a number of things. Actually, Steve just mentioned the flash sync capability of these of the X1D. Because it's a leaf shutter, it can sync without having to use high-speed sync flash at any shutter speed, which is pretty awesome. So this is a farmer in very rural Cuba, and we had all gone to this farm to photograph the people who worked and lived in this place. And so this is shot lit with the ProPhoto B10. I hadn't brought any modifiers along with me, so this is just the raw flash off camera to the right of the subject, the left of the camera. But one of the things that I really love about this camera system is with autofocus and the fairly large apertures with large sensor, the shallow depth of field that's possible. This shot wide open with the 90mm lens, and the eyes are intact, sharp focus, the nose just going a little bit out, the ears going a little bit out. But I love that ability to use autofocus. And a little later, we'll look at a couple of portraits that I made with the older model of Hasselblad that I had, the 501C M, I think it was. Nail and focus on that was a little tougher, but with autofocus on this, it's pretty phenomenal. And this is not cropped in at all. This is just the full frame of the shot. So
I
don't know
just
if you
love the
wanna-
textures.
Yep, great
The
face,
textures are, yeah.
terrific guy. So I don't know if you want to move on to the next image. This guy was literally just sitting on the street in front of a shop that he had, and he said he had no customers, so he was just sitting on the street. And we chatted for a little bit, as much as we chatted, because I have no Spanish. I have Italian, but no Spanish. And that was one of the things that was interesting to me about going to Cuba, because it was a place I'd never been. It was a place where I didn't have language skill. It was a place that I was completely unfamiliar with, other than just doing a little bit of research on my own. I didn't have any kind of preordained ideas about what it was that I was going to encounter there. But I was really knocked out by the country itself, by the people, their incredible friendliness. And this guy, this is shot with a tripod sitting in the middle of the street. And I'm holding a flash off to the left of the camera and sort of reaching across to trip the shutter so that I can get the flash as far out as possible. Again, no modifier on the flash. I think I may have just feathered it a little bit toward the background, but so we didn't get full flash on his face. But again, shot wide open, and that ability of the camera to shoot wide open like that and still be able to nail focus is something that just knocks me out, because I will be clear to say that the focus on the camera is not like blindingly fast. But that's okay, because it is a larger camera, and I'm used to the 4x5 camera. I'm not at all burdened down by the fact that it's a little bit slower operating. I like slowing down, and in fact, that's been sort of my whole mantra in photography: is the slower I go, the better I am. So slowing down with this camera is pretty great. Although, as we'll see coming up, there's some pictures that it's not a slow camera. It may be like a little more cumbersome to focus in terms of, and I'm saying if you're shooting with Sony or any one of the more modern DSLRs, its focus isn't super quick, but it nails it when it nails it. So I'm pretty impressed with it.
Yeah,
Jeff, we've
accuracy.
got a question. Go ahead, John.
I was just going to comment that the accuracy that this camera performs at, beside it being just simple. I mean, it's just such a beautiful camera to pick up and shoot. It's just wonderfully simple. But the accuracy and color and image quality and just overall textures and details, and then it just simply works. When you pick up a professional SLR and you're shooting sports at 14 frames a second, you need focusing systems that keep up with that. It's designed for a different thing. This camera is a dream to shoot. Ideal. I mean, right here, this shot just really speaks to me that it's street photography. It's going out in the world and being lightweight and portable, but having a really incredible tool set. Just a joy to work with.
Along those lines, Jeff, one of the questions we had was, how do you go about getting permission to shoot people on the street?
So
one of the questions.
in these cases, because I'm not planning on selling any of this work commercially, I don't get model permissions. I don't do a release for these pictures, because I'm not using them commercially at all, and have no plans to use them commercially. I have had a few photographs that I've made, portrait photographs that I've made in Italy, where I've been asked to use them commercially, and have had to turn that down, and that's okay with me. I'm also noting that Bill Ackerman, hi Bill, asked if I've paid the subjects. You know, that's like a slippery slope. In the only place that I've been where it's been an issue is in Cuba, because it is a painfully poor country, and you know, everybody wants a little something, and once you start, that
Slippery slope.
it is a slippery slope. So I try not to. Yes, I have upon occasion, you know, made a you know, small gesture of giving somebody something, but I try not to. There's another question. Somebody asking about the native ISO of the X1D. You know, my experience is that the thing performs pretty well up to 1600 and even beyond 1600 if you give it enough light at ISO 1600 or above. And yet I'm most of the time at ISO 100. I forgot to put that in this, you know, when Steve asked me to put the information about this, but I actually just went back and looked. Most of these are shot at ISO 100, occasionally 200, occasionally 400. So I usually stay with one of those, 100, 200, 400, and that, you know, that seems to work well. Again, I'm often, not always, on a tripod, which helps. So you know, I don't know if that completely answers the question. So I'm seeing a couple people asking about getting a curtometer. My first suggestion is make one for yourself, because you know, it's a piece of board with a hole in it, right? That's really all it is. This one just happens to say curtometer on it. And actually, if you go to curtometer.com, you can see a facsimile of it. So I have some that, you know, if like you're really desperate to have one, you know, email me your address and I'll, you know, I'll send, like, I don't know, the first, I don't know how many I have, you know, probably 20 that I could send out, but you know, I'll end up going broke sending the things out. I don't actually sell them.
You are magnanimous.
So
We
what's
need to
that?
get into a partnership with Roberts.
Yeah, Roberts. Maybe John, you can help me distribute.
Yeah.
So
We have cardboard too.
you have card. Yeah, you got cardboard. So this is a third of these, and the third one of these Cuban portraits, and the group of photographers had gone to a boxing gym, and you know, we were photographing these boxers, and there were a number of people photographing the boxers in the ring and, you know, sparring with one another. But I took this guy down the street, and we went, like, really just stood in an intersection. There wasn't a ton of traffic, a little bit that we had to dodge, and I had thought, actually, I went back, and so this slide label is incorrect. This says that it was shot with flash, and it was not. I think somebody was holding a reflector off to one side, off to the right side, or the boxer's left side. So, but I loved this juxtaposition of the street scene, the background, and I took advantage of this woman sitting in the doorway, both in terms of the color that, you know, beautifully juxtaposes and complements the color of his, you know, his wraps on his fists. But I really liked that ability to move him into a different location. And again, you know, I think he was moving around enough that is probably why I chose f5.6. And I usually shoot this camera on aperture priority most of the time, unless I'm using flash, in which case I'm in manual mode. But most of the time, if I'm not using flash, I'm in aperture priority, picking the aperture I want for the amount of depth of field that I want, and then letting the camera choose the shutter speed. Every once in a while, I've been playing around with the auto ISO function, And as long as I set an upper limit for that doesn't, make me cry, then I'm happy with that. But here I know that I remember that I picked f5.6 to make sure that I wasn't going to miss anything on him focus wise, because he was moving around and I was moving around, cars were coming by and so forth. So
Yeah, I just like the color contrast between the wrap and the vest that the woman's wearing, and I just I'm biased because I work for Hasselblad, but I just love the color that our cameras produce.
the color is unbelievable, unbelievable. So it's sort of mind-boggling. The color, the sharpness of these files is pretty astonishing. So I'm just going through some of these questions that are being popped in. Steve Serio, hey Steve, nice to see you here. Is asking about file storage. Right behind where I'm sitting, I've got a couple of different Drobos. One that's loaded up with SSDs, not very big SSDs, and then another one that is has I don't know what I've got, 8 terabytes or something of drives in there. That's sort of my super archive. So anything that I've just shot goes onto the smaller Drobo that has SSDs in it, which is pretty fast. And then anything that I'm kind of done with goes onto the archive Drobo. In the field, in Cuba, I didn't bring a computer at all because I knew that we wouldn't really have time. And I didn't really want to have that extra weight carrying that around. So, and I kind of regretted that. I really wished I'd had the ability to look at things at the end of the day. And I didn't have the iPad Pro solution, et cetera, et cetera. So there I just brought a whole bunch of SD cards, and the camera has dual SD slots, and I had slot 1 be my primary slot 2 be the backup slot, and then when I was done with that card, I just archived that card in 2 different places, one spot for the backup card and one spot for the other card. And I think in that week that I was there, I filled, I don't know, 5 pairs of cards, 64 gigabyte, I think, cards. So that was the my solution in the field. When I'm traveling in Italy, I have a laptop and I have a portable hard drive, like yay.
One
So,
neat thing, Jeff, with the integration with the iPad Pro now is you can go out and shoot all day to the cards and the camera. When you get back in the evening or whatever, you can either tether the camera via the cable or via Wi-Fi and browse the images that are on the cards and the camera on the screen of the iPad without having to transfer them or do anything like that. So you can actually use it in conjunction with iPad Pro just as a way to browse your images in the field or at night at the hotel without having to bring a card reader with you or anything like that, and not even have to transfer them. So that's a neat integration as well.
Right.
And then, this, I suppose you'd call this street photography, right? And I don't really know, street photography has like become this thing. Everybody talks about street photography. And in a sense, I mean, that's sort of what I do and have done for a really long time, even with the 4x5 camera, right? But you see a scene like this incredible graphic color, and I just stood there and waited for people to walk by. And fortunately, a guy with the same exact color blue pants walked by the blue and yellow thing with the bird cage hanging. The bird cage kind of looks like it's drawn on the wall. There's some kind of weirdness going on at the bottom right where the doorway and the stair thing, the whole picture to me kind of becomes flat and deep and flat and deep all at the same time. I think it's a fun picture look at, and I'm really happy that this guy walked by in the blue pants. If only his, his waistband and a white T-shirt had lined up perfectly between the brown and the, that would like he would have looked like he was kind of glued onto the wall or something. So. So we're
Gonna make a
switching
change
gears
here and go a little further north and a little colder.
In the last picture, I was wearing a T-shirt. When I was
You could be wearing
photographing.
a T-shirt in this
I
one
was
too.
not. Yeah, I was probably wearing a T-shirt underneath uh, the other layers of clothing I was wearing because it was cold. It was probably with the wind chill. It was probably 30 below zero, something like that. So I spend a lot of time in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. So there are some people who don't quite get the geography of Michigan. Michigan is actually two huge pieces, right? There's the part that Detroit and Ann Arbor and all that is in, that's to the east of Lake Michigan. And then there's this other part that is north of Wisconsin, Michigan's Upper Peninsula. And at the very northern part of that is a little, very small peninsula, about 50 miles long, that sticks out into Lake Superior, kind of like that. And it is surrounded by water. It was at one time a copper mining boom area, and now is not a copper mining boom area, but it is incredibly beautiful and scenic, and really an interesting place. And I've been traveling there with my family, my parents, my grandparents, for all of my life. And in the last few years, I've been able to travel there in the winter and spend significant time in the winter there. And that has been a real interesting experience because in winter, it's definitely the kind of place that, as my wife Mary Pat says, if you're not paying attention, you can die. Because if you go out without sufficient supplies, or not telling people where you're going, or how long you're going to be there and so forth, and something bad happens, you might just be found in the spring. So this was made right at the end of February. We had a February snowfall total of about 90 inches of snow, and that added to the snowfall from December and January. So there had been about 200 and some odd inches of snow so far during the winter, and it was on its way to, I think the record that they didn't set a record that year, but it was like 290 inches of snow or something like that. So this is a wind whipping off the Lake Superior, which is just to my right in the shot. This is Eagle Harbor, Michigan's former Coast Guard station, which is now a museum about life-saving. And there is, in fact, that much snow just literally piled up in front of it. But the camera is actually pretty functional in the cold with gloves on. Not, you can't wear like the big mitts or something, but pretty functional with gloves on. The shutter release is nice and big. The dials are pretty easily operated with gloves on. The front and rear dials. So it's not that hard to photograph in the cold, other than being cold. So.
And the nice thing along those lines too, Jeff, is that while the camera's main control interface is the touchscreen on the back, we do have buttons that allow you to control ISO, white balance, other things, focus and things like that. So when you're wearing gloves, you can still use the camera and using its mechanical interface instead of having to use the touchscreen. Want to move on?
Sure. So this is spring of that same year as the spring melt happens. As you can imagine, with all that snow, the trees.
Jeff, if that were Chicago, that could be the next day.
It could be. Yeah. So this is this is in probably late probably early April. I didn't really look at the date of this one, but and it's Eagle River, which is a river near Eagle Harbor. Um, and you know, a couple of things that I wanted to point out. One is that I was actually sort of surprised when I got back and I'd shot this in several different ways that this was my favorite one at 1/3 of a second, because typically I prefer a slightly faster shutter speed for water. I'm not a big fan of the candy, cotton candy look of water in photographs. But this one seemed to work. I still got a little bit of the tracery of some of the splashes of water in the lower right corner a little bit. But I really wanted the depth of field to be able to get at least most of the way across the stream, and to pick up all the detail of the pine needles in the foreground. So f32 with that longer lens, the 90mm lens, and that, I had to wade through almost thigh deep snow, soft melting snow, to get back to this river. But because I was thinking, oh, it's spring, I don't need the snowshoes, which was stupid. So I wasn't going to go back to get the snowshoes. It was too far.
So Jeff, we've got a couple questions. One of them from Richard is, do you shoot RAW sometimes? And I don't know, do you shoot RAW or JPEG?
Always. I shoot RAW
Yeah.
always. I know there's this whole thing about RAW and JPEG, and a lot of people are so adamant that they're shooting RAW is a waste of time, blah blah blah. I don't know, man. I have to admit, I have shot a few JPEGs with the Hasselblad just to see, but there's always so much more headroom in the RAW file that I can do so much more with it. So why not? And storage is cheap, and my Mac computers, I've got a relatively, I don't know, 2-3-year-old laptop, a MacBook Pro, and then I'm sitting in front of a 27-inch iMac, and they seem to keep up just fine with Lightroom and the big files. And they are big files, but I'm not noticing like the spinning pizza of death or anything all the time. So I don't really see any real advantage to me anyway in shooting JPEGs. And I think most of the time, if most photographers are honest with themselves, once they see the headroom available in the RAW file, and especially with this camera's dynamic range, man, there's stuff you pull out of these files that I don't even really believe it's possible. So
We've got another question, Jeff, about do you use any filters in the field when you're shooting?
no. I should say yes. I have them, right? Every once in a while, like Blue Moon, I'll use a polarizing screen, like, I don't know, 1 out of every 400 pictures. And I have the neutral density filters, which I will occasionally use, but almost not. Actually, the ND filters that I use, I primarily have used on the Micro Four Thirds cameras when I'm shooting time lapses to be able to get a little bit of motion blur in each picture so that they look better as time lapses. So yeah, I do, but I don't, I guess. I mean,
Okay.
I have them. They're always in the bag. So so I wanted to point something out because I didn't really even notice this when we put this slideshow together. Up until now, all the photographs were made with the 90mm XCD 90mm lens, and that's just interesting to me. If I go through my Lightroom catalog and I look at what most of the pictures that I like, I've rated well in Lightroom. Most of them were shot with the longer lens. And I think that comes from a lifetime of using slightly longer than normal lenses. My favorite lens on the 4x5 was the 210 millimeter, which was slightly longer than normal. And so the 90 millimeter really fits with the sort of way I look at the world. And yet with the shorter lenses, I've really started to use these shorter lenses with this camera. But most of the time when I'm doing that, I'm really trying to make a point, right? Because I think that photography succeeds when the picture is about something rather than of something, right? I mean, we can all take pictures of a thing or of a place, of a spot. You know, we can all like go to this place and say, here I am in this place. But what I want as a photographer is to take a picture that tells a story that's about something. And in this case, it's about this morning light raking across the rocks in the foreground and the island in the background, and using the wide angle lens to juxtapose this kind of blue white snow against that warm color, right? So that's the sort of what it's about part. And so this 30 millimeter lens stopped all the way down, camera on a tripod, 40th of a second. And I actually think this is right after I'd gotten, Hasselblad now has a remote control for the camera's shutter release, which is awesome, rather than using the self timer. Thank you, Steve. And of course, in a picture like this, it wouldn't really matter if you use the self timer because what's 1 minute, 10 seconds one way or the other, right, in this scene. But I know that I was using that little remote control because I think I had just gotten it the day before and I was excited to use it. So
I particularly like in this photo, I like the detail we have in the shadow area and the snow in the foreground, and then the detail we have in the rocks and even further off in the island. That the dynamic range of this camera is just it's amazing sometimes.
well, let's move on and go. I think we go next to Italy, and this is another good dynamic range picture. This little chapel outside of a church, the Church of San Cristoforo, St. Christopher in Cortona, Tuscany, where I've spent a lot of time now. I've taught for the University of Georgia 5 times in that location for 3 months at a pop, 3 months until this last spring semester where, like everybody else in the world, everything changed in March. So, and we had to come home. But there's an aperture above the doorway. I'm standing in the doorway and there's an aperture, a hole that lets the sunlight through. And I had shot this picture with my Micro Four Thirds stuff before. And, I hate to keep, and I guess, we are talking about the Hasselblad camera, but holy camole, this thing is unbelievable because of the amount of shadow detail you can get. Making sure the highlights aren't blown, and then you kind of have your wish of whatever shadow detail you want, and you can just keep placing it wherever you want it to be. So, but it's these little snippets of detail that I'm more interested in these photographs that are. It's more important to me to look at this little chapel that is very carefully maintained. There are always fresh flowers that are brought in by someone every day in this little town. So, so let's move it to the next guy here. And this one, I'm pretty sure that Amanda's out there because she's going to say, "Hey, I have this picture too," because she and I saw these birds flying, gulls flying, and every once in a while they'd leave a shadow on this building. And they did it in long enough that I remember that I had the 45 millimeter lens on the camera, and I moved to the longer lens that I had with me so that I could frame the shot the way I wanted to.
It's a great shot, Jeff.
Just yeah, sit and wait for the thing to fly by, and you know, the graphic quality of the color of the sky and the color of the building and the shadow and the, you know, so and you know, anticipating is an important part of photography, right? You know, it's that, you know, I always like to point out that Henri Cartier-Bresson was not in the right place at the right time. He was in the right place a little bit before the right time, right? You know, he kind of had this idea that, well, there might be a picture here, so I better stick around and see what's going on. So, and I don't know if you want to keep moving here. And gosh, this is a picture that I asked, you know, Steve had picked out some pictures that we were going to include here, and I asked to put this one in too, because it points out a couple of things. You know, Mary Pat, my wife, and I had stopped in this place in this town to have lunch, right? And we didn't really think that there was much to the town. I'd read about it, something that was like a really beautiful place, and I like, well, really. So I left Mary Pat in the cafe, and I said, well, let me just go walk around for a little bit. And I left my tripod there too, with Mary Pat in the cafe. And then I got up and I walked through this, and I said, oh, wow, look at that. And so, you know, I wished I'd brought my tripod with, but I didn't really want to walk all the way back down the hill that I just climbed to go back and get the tripod. So I had to spend some time thinking through where I was going to go. The camera does have an excellent depth of field button on it that I could sort of, you know, and it has focus peaking for those of you who've used mirrorless cameras. It has focus peaking, so it will outline the things that are in focus with a color of your choosing, although I always wish with the focus peaking that there's some other color, because green doesn't work, magenta doesn't work. Orange works here, so switch it over to orange. So figuring out where to stand, first of all, then figuring out where to put the plane of focus so that I could get a hand-holdable shutter speed and an aperture that got me everything in focus, which if I just brought the damn tripod, I could have just put the thing on the tripod and closed down to 22 and shot at 100 ISO like I like, but no. So, but it also sort of points out that you never know, right? In photography, if you're thinking, you know, I'm never going to really get anything, rounding the next corner, or one of my favorite things, the turnaround, you know, the 180-degree swivel around is important. So, you know.
Jeff Constantine has asked how you metered that shot. Do you recall?
Man, I don't. I'm waiting, Hasselblad. I'm waiting for the live in-camera histogram. You know, prior to pressing the shutter release button. But you know, I usually just expose as much as I can without blowing out something. So, and you know, like any one of these cameras, once you see the histogram of the picture you've shot, you can take a look at that histogram and have a pretty good educated guess about whether the exposure is too much or too little. And remember, they're always, you know, the histogram on the back of the camera is always basing its histogram off the JPEG that's embedded in the raw file, right? So usually you got a little bit more wiggle room at the top of the histogram. So yeah, I have no idea. You know, I know, I'm sure I was in aperture priority mode. I usually just use the exposure compensation dial, which Hasselblad calls something else, but what do you guys call it? Quick adjust, something like that.
Yeah.
It's exposure compensation. They call it quick adjust. They're Swedes. They got to do something different. So, you know, I just made sure that I hadn't blown out the white sheets and went from there. So this is a good place for me to just quickly talk about how I approach a new place, right? So this is this great church in Cortona, Tuscany, San Nicolo, Chiesa San Nicolo. It's a very old church. I'd been in there a few times. I'd made a couple of photographs, but I talked to the sexton and I said, could I bring a tripod in? And he said, yeah, sure. And then he pointed to the donation box, and he was like, so we're a poor church. If you can help us, I said, okay, fine. So I put a
But you
few
do
euro
pay
in
for
there.
your photos.
Yeah. So for my sins, right? So the sin of using a tripod. So the beauty of this was that it was this gorgeous sunny day. The church is really interesting. It's got some windows. It's got a lot of like faux painted windows. It's got an altar piece that has an image, a painting on a hinge. So there's two paintings on one side and the other side, so that the sexton can rotate the thing around so you can see the one painting on the one side, and on the primary side there's a painting of Cortona's hometown boy Luca Signorelli, who's like this massively fantastic Renaissance painter. So anyway, I got to spend, I don't know, a couple hours in this very small church. And this gives me this chance to sort of say, when you get to this new place, it's kind of a nice thing to be able to just sit down for a minute and start making a list of nouns and adjectives that describe for you what the place feels like, how it feels, what it's doing to you mentally. And you don't have to write this down. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. In this case, I didn't, but I just sort of sat in one of the pews and I looked around and I kind of gave myself a kind of list of words. And that list of words can then help inform what it is that I want to photograph and how I want to approach the photographs that I made. And in the end, I wound up with a whole set of, I don't know, 15 or so black and white photographs of the inside of this place after spending a couple of hours. And it's a very small, it can't be 60 feet by 30 feet, the main sanctuary. But there's a lot to photograph, and having the tripod slowed me down, and I was able to use those words like, quiet, translucent. I'm just sort of thinking of some of the words that would have popped into my head. Spiritual, obviously, detail, because there was so much detail of how things were arranged in a way that I hadn't really spent any time looking at before. So that ability to kind of sit down and say, oh, what am I going to see? How am I going to approach that? And making that little list of words is a way that I find to be really helpful to begin that process of how am I going to photograph this. So, and then I was in Tuscany this spring, teaching for the University of Georgia. The students all went home after about a month. We decided we'd stay, thinking what could possibly go wrong, and we stayed for a little while. But then Italy went on a lockdown, so I had this ability to really just sort of sit in the house, in the apartment, one bedroom apartment, and I started making some still life photographs while I was there. And fortunately, I had some lighting gear with me and started making these still life photographs. And again, the ability of the camera, this is 1/2000th of a second, so that whatever ambient light was in the room, so that Mary Pat could walk around and not fall over stuff. I can knock that out because the shutter speed can be nice and fast to get rid of any ambient light. So I think there's another couple of these, or at least one of these still life images. And we'll see a picture here in a minute of a guy who's my fruit and vegetable seller. So keep him or keep this in mind. There he is, Roberto, the fruttovendolo. This is, I started this a few years ago on one of my trips to Cortona, and I'm continuing it, although I didn't get any new photographs this spring because of the coronavirus situation. But this gives at least some indication of where this project started. So this is my 501 CM with the CFV 50C back with the Hasselblad planar 80 millimeter at f4 250th of a second. And before I switched over to the Profoto B10, I was using Profoto B2. So Roberto, and this is part of what I find fascinating about the Italian culture. If I walk into Roberto's store and say I'd like some peaches, he says, "When are you going to eat them?" And I said, "Well, I guess I want some for today." And he said, "How about if I do this? I'll give you a bag of like 2 for today, and then like 4 that'll be good in a few days." And then he said, the 2 is for today, and then the 4. So he's like the custom fruit vendor guy, right? Which is really not at all uncommon in Italy. But now, in those 2 pictures before, I walked into his store and I said, "I'm looking for some things to photograph." Oh, he gets all excited. He goes like, he starts pulling out things and he puts them on the counter and looks at the colors as they, compare to each other and so forth and so on. You got to have a collaborator, I guess, with the still life imagery. So this is from a series. This is Franca, who works in the grocery store right next to where Roberto's fruit and vegetable store is. And again, this was shot with my older technology, and it works, right? I think they work as images. Shooting this project was one of the impetus pieces for moving from the Hasselblad back on the 500 series camera, the V series camera, to the X1D, because the portability of the X1D and its ability to shoot these pictures not on a tripod, so that I can move around the subject, they can move a little bit, I think the next one coming up is the least likely florist you might ever see, right? So it doesn't really look like the caring, sensitive florist, but he really is actually is one of the most wonderful men. Mario, and we worked for, I don't know, half an hour on photographing him in a various ways in front of his little shop, and and then I was kind of tearing everything down, and he got out his little cigar, which is like his normal thing. These Tuscan guys often have these little cigars. So he got his little cigar. It's like, wait, that's it. So I got everything put back together, and we made this photograph, which he and I both really like. It feels like Mario.
Very cool. Well, Jeff, we have exhausted the supply of photos that you have shared, and I want to just thank you for sharing your work with us. We have a bunch of questions we're going to answer in a minute, but I just wanted to put some information up on how people can connect with the faces they're seeing today. And so there's some information on how to follow Jeff and Roberts and Hasselblad. We do thank everyone for joining us, and we certainly thank Roberts for helping us on this and being a great partner with Hasselblad. And Jeff, we're very appreciative that you took the time to help us put this together and share a little bit about your work and how we help to contribute to that. So with that said, I think we're going to take a look at some questions here. I've got a whole list of them, so you guys can see them as well. I think I'll answer for Jeff on the question from Constantine about whether Jeff is shot with the 907X. 907Xs are shipping, the special editions are shipping. I don't think Jeff, I haven't had my hands on one, so I'm pretty sure Jeff hasn't either.
Nope. Sadly, no.
Yeah. And then we've got a question. When you carry a tripod in the field, do you use a sling or do you just carry the tripod?
Let's think. I never use a sling. I often will carry it just by carrying it by the, I don't have it here, do I know? By carrying it by the head with the legs slightly spread out so that I can just drop it on the ground and it doesn't tip over. A couple of my camera bags have not too terribly difficult ways, like, I don't know, the Peak Design Messenger bag, I think, has a way I can slide a tripod leg into the top of the thing and carry it that way. Or, I also have one of their backpacks, which has a sort of, there's no really good way to carry it. You just have to suck it up and carry it, so. See, I never wear a sling. So I'm gonna answer a couple of these. Gerald, no, it's not grappa, Gerald.
And then Jeff, we've got the question about the software you use. Our native software is Focus, and it would be what we would recommend processing, but we also fully support Adobe Camera Raw and processing our files within Camera Raw or Lightroom. So I think you're a Lightroom user, Jeff, is that correct?
I am. I partly because I taught or have taught, I teach Lightroom regularly. And my school, College of DuPage, was one of the first places where Adobe rolled out Lightroom. So we were early in on the Lightroom curve. So I've been using it for a long time. I was very sad when Apple discontinued Aperture because I really liked it. But I saw that its feature set was not keeping pace with Lightroom's feature set. And in fact, all the things that I used to like about Aperture now you can do in Lightroom. So, and golly, I know somebody's going to say, what about Capture One? What about, and like, I want to make photographs in the field, and I want to spend as little time figuring out how many pixels dance on the head of a pin as I can. So I know how to use Lightroom. It does what I need it to do. I'm sure that there might be some better engine to get colors that I can't see or print out of, but I don't know. I'm a Lightroom user. And I know there's the whole political thing about, Lightroom and the subscription model and
That's a conversation for another afternoon.
It's another, we don't have that kind of time. So
another question we had, Jeff, was the photographs of going back to Cuba. Says I see the Cuba taken with photographers who seem to be guided by officials. Photos of boxers, ballet dancers. The question was, were you able to foray it out on your own to locations you wanted, or were you accompanied when you were out photographing in Cuba?
This was a kind of workshop-like-ish environment. And so we were with a group and we had a kind of, set of places we went, but there were a number of times where I and at least one or two other photographers just wandered the streets of Havana. The picture of the guy against the blue wall in Trinidad was literally just walking around, seeing what was there to photograph. But I didn't drive anywhere to go any place particular. So, which I think if I went back, that would be an interesting thing to, to just be a little more loose about where I was going. So,
very cool.
So I'm just, somebody's asked a question in Italian. It's my nephew who's very clever.
Okay, good.
Chris, you can see the pictures of the rest of the citizens of Cortona on the website. So I'm going to answer it in English, dude, because everybody else here is speaking English. My nephew. So I'm trying to
Another
think.
question, Jeff, was
Yes.
Salvatore asked what focal lengths, if you carry two primary lenses, what do you have to have? If you can
Ooh,
only take two lenses when doing
that's a
and
great
walking street
question.
photography.
Well, obviously from what I was talking about, the 90, because it's sort of like the lens that fits my head, right? Um, and I would have said the 45. Is that the 90?
That's that's the 90.
The
So
90?
here's a mouse, right? So
And that's the
Yeah.
45.
this, yeah.
So I would have said the 45 until I got the 30. And I think that the 45 is like, if I'm going to leave the place where I am with only the camera and a lens, it's probably going to be the 45, because the 45 is, sort of flexible. You can do a lot of stuff with it. But if I'm going to go with two, probably the 90 and the 30. If I'm going to add a third, um, probably would go with the 135, just again, because my head is more long than it is short in general. So,
Well, we're losing John.
Joan's got a question. Hi, Joan. Um, yes. Joan's question is, do you use one giant catalog with Lightroom, or do you separate your photos into multiple catalogs? And the answer is yes. When I'm traveling, when I'm somewhere, I make a catalog that is for that place, that time. So, Italy spring 2020, right? And then when I get back here to my studio, I import that catalog into my main catalog, which has every photograph in it. But I also keep that catalog as a separate entity should I want that flexibility of going back to it. But once I move it to my main catalog, any edits that I make are in that main catalog. And then if I've got client stuff, like portraits that I shoot for people that ask me to shoot their portrait, or whatever. I've got a couple of clients that I regularly do headshots for. Um, those are just separate catalogs that I don't incorporate into my main catalog at all. And I just have a little set of, on my archive drive back here, I just have a little set of a folder that contains the Lightroom catalog and its attendant little extra file of previews, and another folder of all of the raw files, so that it's all contained in one thing. And then that's just like, headshots for XYZ Corp or whatever. So, and the ability to cleave off a catalog from a big Lightroom catalog, I can take these 75 pictures and slice them off and move them over here, or I can take a catalog that I've made in the field and import it into Lightroom. So I like that flexibility.
Jeff, David is asking for the Italy series why you chose to go black and white for that series.
I'm trying to figure out. I know two David Travises. I'm going to guess this is the British David Travis. And the actually, you'll get this one too, David. Acce, Eugene Acce is the reason. Those Italy portraits for me are a kind of a continuation of the fantastic group of pictures that Eugene Acce made right around the turn of the previous century, from at the beginning of the 20th century, of people in Paris doing their jobs. And there's something about those pictures that I've always really loved, because they're so very honest. And that little story that I told you about Roberto, the fruttovendolo guy, the fruit and vegetable seller, these are people who have an astonishing pride in the job that they're doing. He doesn't want you to leave with a rotten peach. That's why he won't let you touch the peaches. He's the only one who does that. he's going to make sure that you get what you want and what he thinks you should have. So, and going back to those great portraits from that photographer Eugene Ache, is part of why I wanted them to be black and white, because in color they work, but in color they're about the color of things. So, Roberto has that photograph in color as his Facebook profile picture because I gave it to him in both. He liked the color.
So I think we've got a ton more questions that we're just not going to be able to get to online, but we'll try and respond to all of them offline. And I just want to thank John and Jeff for joining us today. I think this was a wonderful talk, and we learned some insight from Jeff as to how you think and what goes into the prep for your work. And just thank you so much for sharing the incredible imagery you created in Cuba and here in the U.S. and in Italy. And we hope that you will get to go back to Italy soon and
Me too.
Continue
Man.
on with that series as the world becomes a little bit normal again, hopefully sooner rather than later. But again, we just thank you. Hasselblad, thank you for joining us today. John, thanks for Robert's partaking, and Jeff, thank you so much for all your time and for sharing your heart with us. I guess your heart for photography.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about photography with a nice group of folks.
Thanks so much.